Have you ever tried to break a bad habit with just sheer willpower? Like, you know the exact cycle,
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we all have, right?
right? You set your alarm for 5 a.m., you educate yourself on, like, all the latest behavioral science.
You buy the expensive journals.
Yeah, the journals, the apps. You set up all these strict, non-negotiable rules for yourself. And for a few days, maybe even a few weeks, it actually works.
You feel totally unstoppable.
Exactly. But then the friction just gets to be too much. You crash, you revert to your old ways, and you just fail miserably.
It's an incredibly common experience. And, our default reaction when we hit that wall is almost always to blame our own lack of discipline.
Yeah, we tell ourselves, I just need to try harder next time.
Right. We think we need more friction, more force, maybe a better habit tracking app.
But the notes we're diving into today is this really fascinating set of theological study materials titled Victory Over Sin. They argue that our failure isn't a lack of discipline at all.
Yeah, the authors present a pretty radical idea here.
They really do. The mission for this deep dive is to explore why this text claims human effort inevitably fails in the face of our deepest flaws, and why something it calls a new birth is presented as the only viable solution.
And the central premise of these notes is that the depth of a problem has to dictate the depth of the solution.
Makes sense.
Right. But according to the authors, human beings have this terrible habit of applying incredibly shallow solutions to incredibly deep systemic problems.
Which brings up an analogy from the text right up front that it just stops you in your tracks. It's the Panadol for a brain tumor scenario.
That one is so vivid.
It is. So imagine a child is complaining of severe chronic headaches, and the parents, naturally wanting to help, think it's just a minor issue.
Like fatigue or dehydration.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they keep giving the child pain tablets, Panadol, Tylenol, whatever they have in the cabinet. But tragically, they later discover the child actually has a brain tumor.
And what's crucial to understand about that analogy, at least from the perspective of the source material, is that the medicine they were giving wasn't technically wrong for a headache.
Right. Painkillers treat pain.
Exactly. The tragedy is that the diagnosis was just tragically too small. The child had a problem that was fundamentally deeper than the treatment being offered.
The diagnosis was too small.
Hmm.
That phrase is exactly what the authors argue we do with our moral or spiritual lives.
We really do.
They argue that we suffer unnecessarily because we apply surface-level solutions, like, behavior modification or strict rule following,
Yeah.
to a problem that's fundamentally rooted in human nature itself.
We're basically trying to treat a spiritual brain tumor with behavioral painkillers.
That's exactly it.
And before we can understand why the text says sheer willpower fails, we kind of have to look at how these sources redefine the disease itself.
Right.
Because if someone walks around thinking their flaws are just bad actions, like the times they snap at a coworker or cut someone off in traffic, they're naturally going to try to use actions to fix them.
The logic makes sense on the surface, right? I did a bad thing today, so I will just try harder to do a good thing tomorrow.
Which is how most people operate.
Yeah, but I need to push back here a little bit on behalf of anyone listening who might consider themselves, a generally good person.
Sure, yeah.
Like, I consider myself decent. I don't steal. I donate to charity. I try to be kind. Are these notes really arguing that despite my good behavior, I am fundamentally infected with this disease?
Well, the text actually anticipates that exact defense. The scriptural texts provided in the source define sin in a way that is far more comprehensive than just breaking the rules or doing bad things.
How so?
Well, yes, the text mentions that sin is lawlessness, referencing 1 John chapter 3, verse 4. But it quickly moves way beyond that purely legal definition of just crossing a boundary line.
Because if it's just breaking a law, then the fix is just, keeping the law better.
Precisely. So to dismantle that idea, the sources bring in James chapter 4, verse 17, which points out that failing to do good is also a part of the disease.
Ah, so a sin of omission.
Right. If you know the good you ought to do and you just don't do it, the text argues that is a failure of nature, not just a failure of action.
And the authors don't stop there. They reference the Gospel of Matthew right around chapters 5, verses 21 through 28, where Jesus takes the definition entirely inward.
Yeah, that's a huge shift.
He argues that internal thoughts and desires, like harboring deep, unjustified anger towards someone or, entertaining lustful thoughts, are fundamentally the same disease as the physical acts of murder or adultery.
And this is where the source material shifts the entire paradigm of morality for you as the listener.
It really pulls the rug out.
Because if sin is simply bad behavior, then a perfectly disciplined person who never acts out is a perfectly righteous person.
Right.
But the notes reference John chapter 16, verses 8 through 9, and Romans chapter 14, verse 23, to argue that the actual root of the disease isn't behavior at all.
What is it then?
The root is unbelief. It's a fundamental state of separation from God.
Okay, so if I'm understanding the text's argument here, let me try to unpack this with that tree analogy the sources use.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
They talk about a tree producing rotten fruit. And we naturally look at the rotten apples and think, oh, those bad apples are the problem.
But the text says the bad fruit isn't the core issue.
Right. The root of the tree is diseased. So to follow this logic to its absolute extreme, even if I sit in a completely empty white room all day, completely isolated, and I never outwardly do a single bad thing,
You're still infected.
the sources argue I'm still infected.
Yeah.
Just because the fruit isn't the problem, the root to the tree is diseased.
According to the framework of these notes, yes, exactly. The bad fruit merely reveals the deeper problem.
Wow.
You could pluck all the rotten fruit off a diseased tree and, the tree might look barren and harmless to a passerby. But biologically, it is still a diseased tree.
So the sins, the actions themselves, are just the fruit.
Yes, but the sinful nature is the root.
I mean, that is a pretty devastating diagnosis of human nature. It completely undercuts the entire modern self-help movement, which is pretty much built on the idea that we just need to optimize our routines to become perfect.
It does. And the authors ground this diagnosis in Romans chapter 3, verse 23, which states that all have fallen short of the glory of God.
Okay, but what does glory actually mean in that context?
Well, the notes then refer back to Exodus chapters 33 and 34 to define what God's glory actually is. It's not just like a shining light.
Right.
It's defined as his internal character, his goodness, his mercy, his perfect righteousness. So falling short in this theological framework isn't about stepping over a legal boundary line.
It's falling short of an internal state of perfect goodness.
Exactly.
Okay, so if the root of humanity is fundamentally diseased, the next logical quote in the text forces us to ask is, where did that disease come from?
Which is the big question.
Because understanding the origin of the disease is really the only way to understand why the authors claim our own efforts to cure it are completely doomed.
And the sources point to an inherited condition. According to Romans chapter 5, verse 12, humanity inherited a fallen nature through Adam.
And the authors are very careful here to clarify that Adam didn't just, pass down bad habits.
Right. It wasn't a behavioral trend he started.
It wasn't like he was just a bad example and the rest of humanity foolishly decided to copy his lifestyle choices.
No, the text argues that what humanity inherited was an organic corruption. It was mortality and a fundamental separation from the source of life.
It's structural.
Yes. The notes reference Isaiah chapter 59, verse 2, highlighting that this iniquity creates a literal structural separation between humanity and God.
Think about it like a poisoned spring of water high up in the mountains.
Okay, yeah.
If the spring is poisoned at the very source, every single river, stream, and creek flowing out of it is going to be polluted naturally.
Because of where it comes from.
Exactly. The water down in the valley doesn't have to try to be polluted. It doesn't use willpower to become toxic. It just is, by virtue of its origin.
That illustration captures the source material's argument perfectly. The human race became corrupted at the source.
Right.
That is why the authors claim sinners naturally produce sin. It flows outward without effort because it is the nature of the source.
I want to use another analogy here because this is really the crux of why human effort fails. Imagine you own a car with a completely blown engine.
Okay.
The block is cracked in half, the pistons are melted to slag. Now, because you love this car, you spend thousands of dollars repainting it cherry red.
Oh, I see where you're going.
You polish the chrome until you can see your reflection. You meticulously clean the interior. You even send the driver to years of elite driving school to memorize every single rule of the road.
But the engine is dead.
The engine is dead. Education and rules are just fresh paint on a dead machine. The car isn't going anywhere.
And that analogy brings up a really fascinating point the notes make about the purpose of rules, or, in the biblical context, the law.
Right, because if the human engine is broken, what good is the manual?
Exactly. The text refers to Romans chapter 8, verse 3 to explain this. The law is holy and the law is good, but the authors point out that it is fundamentally weak when it meets fallen human nature.
Because knowing the speed limit doesn't magically fix a blown engine.
Yep.
If I have a broken leg, reading a book about how to run a marathon doesn't heal my bone. It just makes me more depressed about the fact that I can't run.
Yeah, the text uses the concept of a mirror to explain the law's actual function.
A mirror.
Yeah, if you look in a mirror, it does a perfect job of showing you the dirt on your face. It provides a flawless, accurate diagnosis of your condition.
Well, that's good.
But a mirror cannot wash your face. It has absolutely no power to cleanse or repair. It only has the power to reveal the flaw.
So if the law is just a mirror showing us our broken engine, what do we actually do? This is where the notes bring in this incredibly raw, vulnerable moment from the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 7, verse 24.
Yeah, he hits rock bottom there.
He really does. He has been looking in the mirror, trying to use the law to fix himself, and he realizes the absolute depth of the problem. His very nature is broken. And he cries out in total frustration.
But notice what he asks.
Right. He doesn't ask, what rule will save me? He doesn't ask, what 12-step habit tracking program will fix me?
No.
The text points out that he asks, who will deliver me?
The authors argue that this precise phrasing, asking who instead of what, is the turning point of the entire theological framework.
It shifts everything.
Because the answer to a fundamentally broken nature cannot be a new system of rules. It cannot be a new educational curriculum.
I have to be a savior.
Exactly. It has to be a person outside of the broken system.
Okay, so if the engine is completely dead and human effort, all our, polishing and painting of the car, is completely useless to make it run, how do these notes actually get us out of this trap?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because right now, for you listening, you're probably feeling completely paralyzed. If my willpower is just fresh paint, what is the actual fix?
Well, the sources point to an entirely new engine, the necessity of what they call the new birth.
The new birth, okay.
This is the major pivot from the problem to the solution in the study notes. The text highlights that Jesus did not come merely to forgive sins.
Right.
Going back to your car analogy, the authors argue, he didn't just come to pardon your bad driving record so you don't go to jail. He came to restore the life of the machine itself.
He didn't come to pay your parking tickets. He came to drop a brand new V8 engine into the car.
I love that. And the scriptural backing for this in the notes is John chapter 10, verse 10, stating, he came that they may have life. And Romans chapter 5, verse 10, which talks about being saved by his life.
It's all about life versus death.
Yes. The sources contract this beautifully using 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 22. Adam passed down death, but Christ gives life.
So it's like two different family trees.
The text frames it exactly like that. Two heads of humanity, two inheritances. You inherit death from the poisoned spring of the first, or you inherit life from the second.
Let's slow down here for a second, because the notes make a very careful distinction that I want to assure is crystal clear.
Okay, what's that?
They separate the concept of justification from sanctification. How do those two concepts play out differently in someone's day-to-day life, according to this text?
It's an important distinction, and the authors draw a hard line between them. Justification, according to the text, is the legal standing.
Legal standing, okay.
It means being put right with God, being accepted, and having the record of wrongs wiped clean. It removes the condemnation.
So justification is the judge hitting the gavel and saying, you are pardoned, you are free to go.
Exactly.
But if we only have justification, we essentially have a pardoned criminal who still has a criminal mindset. He's just going to go right back out and break the law again because his nature hasn't changed.
That is exactly why the text insists on the necessity of sanctification. If justification is the legal pardon, sanctification is the internal transformation. It is the ongoing process of Christ actually changing your life from the inside out.
That makes total sense.
To map it back to your analogy, justification deals with the penalty of the bad driving. Sanctification is the actual installation of the new engine so you can drive differently.
And the notes point out that this internal change isn't a suggestion, it's a promise.
Right.
The text quotes Ezekiel chapter 36, verses 26 up to 27. I love how this is framed, because God does not look at humanity in this passage and say, I see you're struggling. I really need you all to dig deep and try harder.
Which is the opposite of our human instinct, right? We always want to try harder.
Always.
But the promise in Ezekiel is, I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you. The gospel, as presented by these authors, is not a demand for better human effort. It is the gift of a completely new internal reality.
A completely new heart, not a repaired heart, not a heart that went to a weekend retreat to learn mindfulness, a new one.
And this leads the authors to a radical conclusion about how a person actually achieves victory over their flaws.
What's the conclusion?
The text references 1 John chapter 3, verse 9 to argue that this victory doesn't come from human striving, but solely because of the new birth.
Because of the new birth.
Right. The verse states that whoever has been born of God does not practice sin because, and this is the critical phrase in the notes, his seed remains in him.
His seed remains. The text is describing an organic, biological level change in the spiritual sense.
It really is.
The actual life and nature of Christ is implanted into the person.
The authors are making a bold claim here. They're saying the only solution to a corrupted nature is an entirely new divine nature living inside you.
Okay, so this brings us to the most practical, yet probably the most confusing part of the entire deep dive.
Yeah, the application.
Right. If I receive a new heart, what does living that out look like on a Tuesday morning?
That is the real test.
If my willpower is useless and human effort is off the table, do I just sit back on the couch, watch TV, and do absolutely nothing? Do I just wait for this new heart to magically pilot my body around like a robot?
The text anticipates that exact confusion. If the individual doesn't provide the effort, what on earth is their role?
Exactly.
The authors introduce the concept of union with Christ, quoting Galatians chapter 2, verse 20. The apostle writes, "It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me."
So it's a shared life.
Yes. The Christian life, therefore, is not self-powered righteousness. It is a shared life.
I really want to dig into the analogy the notes use for this based on John chapter 15, verses 4 through 5. It's the visual of the vine and the branches.
One of the best visuals for this.
It really is. Think about an apple tree. A branch on that tree doesn't wake up in the morning, clench its bark, sweat, scream, strain, and use sheer willpower to try and pop out an apple.
The visual of a branch sweating and striving is absurd, but the authors point out that this is exactly how most people approach their moral lives.
Right. The branch doesn't read a self-help book on how to be a better branch.
No, it doesn't.
What does the branch actually do? It just stays connected to the vine. It rests there, abiding in the connection, drawing sap from the main trunk. And the fruit, the apple, happens as a natural, effortless byproduct of that connection.
The authors argue that this is the exact mechanism of spiritual victory.
It's all about connection.
The fruit of good behavior is a byproduct of abiding in the source of life. If you sever the branch from the vine, no amount of effort, planning, or rules will produce an apple. The branch just withers.
So, practically speaking, what does abiding actually look like for you, the person listening to this right now?
Well, the text lays out 5 practical steps.
Yeah, I want us to really chew on them. Because shifting from striving to abiding sounds great on paper, but it is incredibly hard in practice. Step 1 in the notes is recognize the depth of the problem.
This goes right back to the mirror we talked about earlier.
Right.
The authors argue you must admit you cannot save yourself. You have a blown engine. You have to admit the Panadol isn't fixing the tumor.
Okay, step 2 is where I personally struggle. The text says we must stop trusting in self-effort. I'll be honest, that hurts the ego.
Oh, it completely crushes the ego.
I love believing that I am the captain of my own ship, and that I'm just, one good morning routine away from perfection.
It absolutely requires a surrender of pride, which is why the text argues human nature resists it so fiercely.
We want to be the hero.
Exactly. You have to abandon the illusion that your flesh, your sheer grit, can cure its own corrupted nature. If the engine is dead, you have to stop pretending you can fix it with a wrench.
Which naturally leads to step 3. Surrender to Christ. If I can't fix it, I have to hand over the keys.
And this isn't just a one-time intellectual agreement. The notes frame this as a daily choice to yield control.
Daily.
And step 4 follows closely. Believe his promises. This means trusting the mechanism we discussed earlier, trusting that he actually can and will transform the heart, as promised in Ezekiel.
And finally, step 5. Abide in him daily. The text references John chapter 1, verse 12 here. But how does the text say we actually do this? Is it just a mindset shift?
It's more than that. The notes define abiding as living a lifestyle of dependence rather than a lifestyle of grit.
Dependence over grit. I like that.
The mechanism of drawing sap from the vine involves practices like prayer, leaning heavily on the truths of Scripture rather than your own emotions, and acting in faith that his life is actively working through you.
So it's active, not passive.
Yes. It's about focusing your attention on the connection to the vine rather than obsessing over the production of the fruit.
It's shifting the entire operating system of your life from an attitude of, I must achieve this, to I must receive this.
Beautifully said. The framework of the notes suggests that receiving rather than achieving is the only way a broken human nature can experience true transformation.
Let's take a step back and look at the whole picture we've unpacked today.
Let's do it.
We started by looking at how we naturally approach our bad habits and deepest flaws. We think we just need a painkiller for bad behavior.
We just want the quick fix.
Right. We think if we just get better rules, read better books, and muster more discipline, we can fix ourselves. But the text argues that this diagnosis is tragically too small.
The authors argue that the problem isn't just the rotten fruit of bad actions, it's a diseased root. Humanity inherited a broken engine from Adam, a nature fundamentally separated from God.
And because the problem is a dead engine, painting the car with new rules doesn't help at all.
Not one bit.
The law, as good as it is just a mirror. It shows us how broken we are, but it can't fix us.
You can't wash your face.
Exactly. The core message of these study notes isn't try harder, it's receive a new life. According to this text, Jesus didn't come to make bad people behave better. He came to make dead people alive.
That is the essence of it.
The argument is that we need a completely new heart. And the only way to live that out is to stop straining like a disconnected branch and start resting in the vine.
And that leaves us with a pretty profound implication for the listener.
What's that?
If true victor, according to this text, comes from surrendering and simply abiding rather than striving, look at your own life right now.
Yeah, think about your own struggles.
Where are you currently exhausted from trying to paint a broken car instead of just handing over the keys to get a new engine?
Wow. That is a question worth sitting with long after this audio stops playing. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking those big questions. Stop settling for surface-level painkillers, and we will see you next time.